Live from the Julia Morgan Ballroom in San Francisco, extracting the signal from the noise. It's theCUBE, covering Structure 2015. Now your host, George Gilbert.
And we're back. This is George Gilbert. We're live at the Julia Morgan Ballroom in downtown San Francisco at the iconic Structure 2015 conference. We have a very special guest with us, Jerry Chen, formerly, I guess we could say, leading a big chunk of VMware and now having moved to Greylock. Jerry, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So, give us some context. When you moved over to Greylock, what did the industry look like to you? What were the opportunities you were looking for then?
You know, I joined Greylock back in 2013, so almost 3 years ago. And I saw there a bunch of different waves happening in technology you saw the big data wave, you saw the cloud wave, and one of the waves that I was focused on is something I call DDI, Developer-Defined Infrastructure. And what we saw at my decade of VMware was a shift towards developers as making decisions around infrastructure. Amazon as a cloud is a perfect example of developers making what used to be IT decisions. And so that led to a bunch of investments or a bunch of investigations by me in technologies like Docker, which I invested in 2 years ago, other data plays that I also have been spending time in, or security plays I've been spending time in, really looking at how developers and data scientists really are rethinking what traditional IT was.
Would that be, would it be fair to say that this was the capture the developer as the design win, and then you have to reach IT who pays for sort of uptime?
I think it's fairly correct. I mean, I think all these technologies now, they're two halves to a product. There's going to be a developer or a data scientist or a user aspect to it. And that user is going to be a developer for technologies like Docker or a database, a data scientist for either a database or an analytics platform, or an end user for like next generation enterprise apps, be it like a mobile client. But on the backside, there's going to be an IT buyer, security, manageability, scalability, reporting, auditing. And so when you go to market, you have to think about what does the IT buyer want, all those abilities, but also what do the users want? And that user population used to be either strictly IT or strictly end user, but now the number of populations you sell to in a company have changed, right? Developers, data scientists, business analysts, mobile sales forces, construction workers, the population of users for technology has just exploded.
Okay, so let's take a look at that. Now, we have what seems to be a slow motion price collapse in infrastructure software because of open source and because of cloud meter pricing. You have to reach different constituencies, so that would suggest perhaps a higher cost sell unless it's more self-service. How do you square that circle?
It's not necessarily higher cost, but where you spend the dollars are different. So for example, open source is a great example. Look at Docker or Hadoop and Cloudera, two examples of using open source as a way to reach potential customers that reduces the friction for selling, reduces the marketing cost. There's a selling cost of trying to sell the enterprise product behind the developer or the data scientist adoption, but those dollars have shifted, right? So whereas you used to have a large marketing campaign to try out my new database or new language, the open source has become a great way for developers to vote with their feet. So they like the technology, they like the framework, they'll use it, and that's more or less not free. You have to still invest and spend money into a developer ecosystem, but the type of dollars change.
Do the economics work where, in the old day, to get that initial sale, you needed the license, and that essentially was a loss leader. Now, is that initial sort of land, of land and expand, is that self-service enough so that we don't need the upfront license?
It's a great question. I think there's two things we're trying to unpack. One's a shift from a perpetual license to subscription, as well as kind of the cash flow issues of getting paid up front versus not getting paid up front for open source.
Right.
So I think the accounting, we're what, 10 years into the SaaS business model now. I think we learned that, look, if you can get the customer acquire the entity, the subscription model is actually great because it gets predictable revenues, predictable cash flows. You don't have to worry about renewals or lumpy enterprise sales. I think the question then becomes, how can you cost effectively land that customer? Right. And that's a combination of using new techniques like open source, app stores for the consumerization of IT, like Apple App Store, the Google Play Store, through the web. So there are things you can do to reduce your cost of land, but it's not for every product. There's some products that are like large systems, like enterprise applications, that still have a large land because they're selling to the entire company. So it's hard to be absolute.
Those have not gone through sort of the price collapse, the applications.
That's correct. That's correct. Because in infrastructure space, you're like you said, you're stuck between open source and a cloud space, right?
Right.
OSS on one side and Amazon, Google, Azure on the other side. And so threading that needle of how to use open source as momentum driver, but then sell enterprise products around or behind it is kind of a new business model that a lot of the companies around here are pioneering. I think a couple companies involved with like Docker and Cloudera are kind of proving that it's possible to build a business in this world.
So let me go back on this topic and drill down a little bit. A lot of the infrastructure companies I talk to say, we're going to make money by helping the customer operate our software.
Okay.
In other words, they understand they're not going to make it in the initial sort of selling to the developer, the design win. But if you look at a matrix of sort of application software, middleware, infrastructure, and a couple other layers, and then there's performance management, change management, high availability. Basically, when they say we're helping the developer run the software, they're talking about like giving them a console in that one box in performance management. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit.
No, I think it's hard to say that's for all products, right? So I think from installation, optimizing, running, monitoring, upgrading, tuning, that whole life cycle, upgrading is part of running it, right? And you can either do that as a software subscription, you can run as a service in the cloud, but I think that life cycle are all things enterprise will pay for.
Yes. And if it's in the cloud, for sure you can capture that, because you also get the integration points. The vendor's responsible for the integration points. But if it's on premise, let's say it's your a messaging product or some part that fits into a bigger stack. Every one of those products has their own failure model, their own high availability model, their own fault tolerance, security model. How do you get those to play together, even if each vendor gives you a life cycle?
That's been that's everything old is new again, right? So I think the pendulum swings with these integrated systems where people try to sell storage, compute, networking in a big box, a la Sun, and then it broke apart into like storage as a separate category, network a separate category, service a separate category. And then how do you make those things run together, support the things together as well? And just like in the physical world, you had this pendulum swing from integrated to piecemeal, and there were viable business models in best of breed. In software, you also have folks who want to offer the whole suite versus best of breed software products. And just like in the physical world where you had best of breed infrastructure, physical infrastructure, best of breed software infrastructure can also play well together. Okay,
so then it's a question of perhaps the class of customer, like the early adopter can sort of swallow the multi-vendor components. So, all right, I took you on a digression to sort of operating expenses. Perhaps tell us what you see as some of the more promising, well, let's just make it open-ended categories where, maybe not the next Uber, but what do enterprises have to do to move to, beyond just the ERP replacement, that sort of thing?
Well, I think ERP is a great category where you have large horizontal apps like HR, CRM, financials, but I think different verticals also lend themselves to disruption as well. I just invested in a company called Runbix in the construction software space. So construction is a $10 trillion vertical that historically hasn't spent a lot of money on technology, but now they're using GPS to like track their tractors and cranes. They're using drones to measure progress. And Runbix is using smartphones and mobile technology to make your workforce more productive and safer. And so you think about there's a bunch of horizontal applications like ERP you mentioned, but I get really excited by different vertical applications like construction, like healthcare, like financials that have plenty of opportunity for this kind of end-to-end applications that are very disruptive and actually can make a big difference in both the top line and bottom line for a side business.
And I imagine on those, again, part of the value, since it's being run by the vendor,
Yeah.
the problem with on-premise was every customer had to write the integration points, and here the vendor can do it just to the common applications that their customers run.
Both on-premise, off-premise, but I also think in this cloud world and the way apps are being built today, everything has an API, everything has kind of a underlying plumbing, so the way to integrate applications is a lot easier today, and I think you're seeing a bunch of companies now come together to either build a full stack app, but can also integrate with like classic databases, ERP applications, security applications. So I really think we're at this
so integratable by design.
by design. It's kind of like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you had a business, you had to make sure you had a website. Now if you write an application, you better make sure you have an API, right? Because almost every app now is going to have a way to integrate and talk to other apps by design.
Okay. All right, Jerry Chen, we're going to have to leave it there.
No worries.
As always, great to hear your insights. And this is George Gilbert. We'll be back in a few moments. This is Structure 2015, downtown San Francisco. Thanks.